challenge there. This is what I usually get presented with. All the inappropriate behaviors that this student is exhibiting and all the problems that have cropped up. And that's exactly what I did a couple weeks ago. This is what I was presented to by the superintendent of this entire school system. Screaming, hitting other children, and blurting out. And they want me to take those away, okay? That is only half of this business of behavior. That's only half of it. And yet this is all I ever hear when I'm being presented with a crisis situation. That's all I ever hear about. But the part that I don't hear about, and I really have to coax people, is all of these inappropriate behaviors mean that the other half is missing. The absent appropriate behaviors are missing in this whole mix here. It's really missing. So instead of screaming, does this child know what an inside voice is? Has he been taught that? Many times we assume that that will happen, that they will know this. What about hitting other children? Does he know about only touching gently? Does he know how to play with other kids? Does he know how to interact on an appropriate level here? What about blurting out, raising hand and waiting to be called on? We get lots of little students that are taught, you got to raise your hand before you can be called on. So they're raising their hand, but then they're still blurting out, right? You've seen that? So these are the things that we're going to be tackling today, because the right side of this is really where we have to put all the eggs in this basket. We really have to look at that aspect. And I'm not as concerned, of course I'm concerned, about figuring out what to do with the left side of this mix, but it's the right side that we have to figure out. We really have to figure that out. If the teacher or the parent's first response to that student's inappropriate behavior, whatever it is, if their first response is to say stop and no, or don't hit, or get them away from that situation, and that behavior has been eliminated, okay, and it doesn't come back, everything is solved, you have just won the lottery, okay? And you most likely have a typical kid. Okay, but when we're talking autism, that's not what's happening. And I see a lot of redirection. And just going back to the little guy earlier in the week, I'm seeing a lot of redirections of behavior, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with redirections of behavior. But if it keeps coming back, then you're going to have to do something about that. So those reoccurring behaviors, I'm not talking about the behaviors that are so simple they disappear when you redirect and explain, okay? And then that child is perfectly fine. But when all you do is stopping and redirecting and redirecting and redirecting that behavior, I usually tell teachers at that time that you end up being a much better fireman than you are teacher. Because you're putting out behaviors, aren't you? It crops up and you handle it and it's gone away, and then everything is fine for a little bit, and then it crops up again, it is again, and you redirect again and it gets settled down, and then a little bit later, next day, 2 days, a week later, it crops back up, and you end up putting out so many fires that you're really not solving this situation at all, because it's still coming back. Why does it come back? Because this behavior is working for this child, isn't it? That function is there. It's working for this child. So we've got to get beyond firemen. We have to get beyond firemen. So if any of you have a piece of paper, take it out. And you can get these slides later on through your email, but just follow along. So go ahead and turn a piece of paper over and draw yourself a triangle, because we're going to I want to go through this whole process. So you tell me, we have got a new behavior, and let's make some assumptions at this time, that you already know what this behavior is that you're going to have to change, right? You've already seen it coming back and coming back and coming back. You already know what it is. And you have to start doing a functional analysis of behavior. So you tell me, and I like a talky audience, so please jump in. Tell me, where do you start? What do you do first? What do you do first? Come on, yes. Figure out what the motivation for that behavior is. Okay, that's in there. It's not the first step. Yes? Okay, so you're back at the redirection stage of telling him no, right? Does that behavior keep coming back? Oh, yes. Okay, so right here. Okay, so we've got to do this functional analysis. So we're going to have to sit down with folks and say, okay, we got to start doing a functional analysis. And you'll hear this in school. We got to do an FBA, right? Where do you start? How do you start with one? Okay, data is in there, but it's not the first step. Yes? We've got to find out the antecedent, don't we? But it's not the first step. We're talking general ed. We're talking inclusion classrooms. So what is the first step? Write down what you want for this student? Oh boy, that's in there too, but that's way down the road. Am I getting you scared here? Yes. Observe is in there as well. This time you've done a lot of observing by this time. By the time you recognize you've done a functional analysis, you've already seen this behavior come back 1,000 times. Yes? Define the behaviors in there too. It's not the first step. This is what I have a problem with. Even behavior specialists will tell you, you got to start with data. You got to have all of this here. That is true, except, remember I said functional analysis with a twist? We're in general education classrooms right now. Okay, that makes a difference when you start doing functional analysis. You must start with the staff. You have to start with the staff.